Good morning.
Good morning.
So tell me a little bit about you and your business.
Well, yeah, so first of all, I'm Marco, and I have three businesses, one being Red Thread Ventures. It's a startup that we invest in venture capital for. A subset of that is called Weave. It's a $10 million fund that we're currently raising here in Western Canada. And in addition to that, I'm actually a regional chapter president for a community of angels called Valhalla Angels.
Love them. Good group. So venture capital, you're a young guy. Tell me a little bit about the origin story of this.
Yeah, well, for me, it starts when I was really young. I was 12 years old, and in fact, I'm the accident of the family. So my brothers, they're 8 and 11 years older than me. And so when my dad was going to them, who were 20 and 23 at the time, with an investment opportunity, he wanted to include me. So he came to me and he said, hey, I have this IPO I'm investing in. Your brothers are coming into it too. The only caveat to this is anything that I put in on your behalf, you have to pay back the principal upon fruition of the investment. And fortunately, it happened to be quite fruitful. And so that kind of kicked off my investment career. So since then, for about 15 years, I've managed my own portfolio, investing in the public markets. Been an angel investor for anywhere from 3 to 5 years. With relative success. I've had some huge successes, but some pretty notable substantial failure, which I think is pretty important to the process. Somewhere along the way, found myself going to university and running their student-run portfolio, about $2 to $3 million in assets, and managed that for a couple of years. Came out of university looking for something that was not traditional. Something of note is my dad is a very successful entrepreneur in his own right, moved to Calgary in the 90s and built an oil and gas company that's still trading on the stock market today, the NYSE, and is in 9 countries. And so my thought was maybe I can try and follow in his footsteps in some capacity. And my words were, be the entrepreneur without actually being the entrepreneur. And that led me right to venture capital. We'll get into this later, I'm sure, but I soon found out that I was not just pretending to be an entrepreneur, but I actually was one.
Right.
When I actually came into this industry, my thought was, okay, I have no ties. I want to do this myself. So I moved to a new city, and I just literally Googled venture capital and found every person that I could find and emailed 100 names. And fortunately, one person happened to respond, and he's a member of the community here in Edmonton. His name's Mark Benning from Sprout Fund. And he just kind of blew up my whole network. One conversation turned to 2 turned to 4, and it just kind of exponentially grew. And it wasn't 6 months until I got my first opportunity working for a fintech company here in Edmonton called Dry Run. An excellent,
I love Blaine.
Yeah,
he's a great guy.
Blaine is a great guy, and so he's a pretty impressive individual, and they wanted a cheap hire, and I was just looking for like the full round experience, and they were happy to provide that. And then it was only about 6 or 7 months into that situation where one of the people I had networked with, my partner Mark, he reached out to me and he said, hey, I know you're more on the investor side of things. I know you have a lot of experience with portfolio management. Do you want to come and have a conversation? I have this opportunity at Red Thread. And so from there, I talked to him on Thursday. I talked to the founder, Sean, on Friday, and started working the following Monday. So it really accelerated my career in a fashion that I actually didn't anticipate. But now it's been 18, 20 months. And as mentioned, we've invested in about roughly $5 million, raised about $5 million of capital. We're currently raising $10 million for our fixed LPGP fund called Weave, focused in Western Canada specifically for region. And then in addition to that as well, Mark and I have really expanded and latched our talents into multiple angel networks globally and really become, in my opinion, well known in Western Canada. So that's kind of the origin story and what kind of brought us to today.
I love that. I want to dig in on the entrepreneur thing. So your dad was an entrepreneur, and you kind of discovered that you were an entrepreneur through the process. Was that a a dream of yours from the beginning? Was it something that you kind of stumbled into? When did you kind of discover that you were an entrepreneur?
So, was it a dream of mine? Absolutely not. My dad was very specific in his experiences as an entrepreneur. He said, it's very difficult. It's a lot of work. Sometimes you will not be rewarded for the amount of work that you put in. And subsequently, the first 5 or so years of being an entrepreneur can be quite challenging, both financially as well as kind of just mentally. And so I thought to myself, it's still inspiring to put yourself in an environment where individuals are actually trying to make the world a better place.
Love it.
And so the reference that I always point in the work situation is, if I were to give $50,000 to Apple, what would they do with that money? How would it benefit that company? And ultimately, the answer is it wouldn't. Whereas if an individual that comes to me with a pain management software, and he says, this could help every individual in areas X, Y, and Z, and I give him $50,000, that could finance an employee for a full year. Mm-hmm. That could be their runway for a month. Mm-hmm. That could be just the cost to file their patents to secure their IP. It's a lot more impactful. And so I thought to myself, like, yeah, this is the industry I want to be in. I want to have impact in my investments and be able to make that difference to these companies. And like I said, originally my thought is, okay, be the entrepreneur without being the entrepreneur. And then it just, by happenstance, you realize when you're raising these funds, both in-house as well as externally for these companies, that you're selling these companies yourself as you go on and justifying them. And you're running your own business, so to speak. And so it's kind of that aha moment that everybody says where you're like, oh, I guess I actually am an entrepreneur. Was it a dream? Not necessarily, but is it what I am today? Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I love, I think one of the things that is really important that you mentioned, to me, the heart of an entrepreneur, actually, you know what, I'm going to turn that over to you. What would you say, could you define the idea of an entrepreneur? Like a definition of an entrepreneur?
I don't know. Personally, a definition of an entrepreneur to me is an individual who finds their passion, and once they find their passion, they build upon it. That would be my my definition, and upon building upon it, they provide it to the world. They give it to the world. That would be kind of a probably unique, different definition of an entrepreneur. It's anybody who really drives home what they want to do and why they are impactful and why they want to make a change.
I love it.
That would be personally my definition of an entrepreneur.
Well, you go to a guy like Blaine. I mean, he's got a great backstory as well, and how he kind of created Dry Run. You've got Painworth we talked about earlier. These are passions that are driven within us. You had some incredible opportunities, and that turned into some really neat things there. But I love the fact that you're helping them out. I think the other definition of an entrepreneur that I like is, well, one that I use a lot is somebody who consistently delivers a solution to a well-defined problem. Now you tie that in with some passion like you talk about, and I think that's it. And it could be somebody that they see a need in the world. It's usually a way to help other people, right? I think that the ones that are kind of seeking just financial gain are missing out, right? And the ability to help other people, like you said, you throw in $50,000 to a guy that can get his IP going or something that makes a difference to them, that's huge. So, well, okay, so you're sitting here now, you've got some great things starting to come together. I mean, you've got a great brand growing here with Weave and Valhalla and Red Thread. What's this going to look like? I mean, you're still so young, right? I mean, where are you going to take it? What do you want to do with it?
So this is a long horizon. Bear with me with that. But the way venture capital has been developed is, especially in today's modern age, is a lot of these people think that they can accomplish the world, and I love that, including myself. I feel like I can do that. but it's a very difficult industry. And there's a lot of industries or individuals that will start their first fund and it'll die out because they don't get the results that they need to carry on into Fund 2 and Fund 3 and so on and so forth. Of course, our goal is to create a venture capital firm rather than a fund. So Red Thread Ventures, for context, is what's called an evergreen corporate structure. And essentially what that means is it's a free-flowing entity. Capital comes in, capital goes out. What we're trying to do with Weave is a more fixed situation where we raise a certain amount of dollars. Once you raise that dollar, you have a certain amount of capital you can allocate. That capital runs out. That fund lives for about 10 years, but then you raise for your second fund. And so for us, we're raising $10 million today. That's our goal. But in 2 years, 3 years, we'll be raising our second fund, which is typically 4 to 5x the size of your first fund. And then hopefully 3 or 4 years after that, we're raising our third fund, which is 4 to 5x of that fund as well. So the capital, as I'm sure you can imagine, exponentially grows.
Yeah.
And so that's our situation today. That's our dream, is to get to Fund 3 and 4. Of course, our performance is highly dependent on that, but we feel confident that we have the capabilities of accomplishing it.
So obviously the goal of this, like you said, is you want to help entrepreneurs kind of get going and make things happen there. So, which is awesome. I mean, I think that they need it. Often finance is a big part of kind of growing those ventures, growing to the next stage, and getting some capital to be able to do that is important. What do you look for? Tell me a couple of the key indicators that you're looking for. Passion was one I think you mentioned, but what other kind of things do you look for when you're evaluating these guys?
First, I'll talk about the environment and the reality of an entrepreneur, and then I'll backtrack into why it's relevant. And so first and foremost, let me tell the viewers that this is a very pessimistic environment with an optimistic subset.
Right.
And by that I mean the reality is 95% of startups fail. And I don't want to scare anybody. That's just a statistical measure.
True.
95% of startups fail. And so it's very difficult for any startups to succeed. However, all of the people in my community, the angel community, the venture community, they're like rooting for the underdog. It's a pessimistic environment in the statement where everything is telling you that you're going to fail, but the whole community surrounding it is like rooting for the underdog. And it's something that I personally thrive off of. Everybody is constantly trying to find ways to help the entrepreneur succeed, whether that be product market fit, one of the largest reasons why people fail. You mentioned it yourself. There has to be a solution to, there has to be a problem that your product provides a solution for. If it doesn't, that's a big reason why companies fail. The second is actually management, cash flow specifically. About 1/3 of companies end up failing because they don't have the financial understanding to operate their company. And then, of course, as mentioned, when investing in such an early company, there's not a lot of basis to go off of. So you have to really judge the management team and if they're capable of succeeding. And so when you're a new entrepreneur, that last part, well, really all parts, but that last part can be really scary, because a lot of these individuals, they're going to be coming and judging you. And people don't like to be judged.
100%.
But if I were to give any advice to those future entrepreneurs, it's just to be yourself. For me, I look for charisma. I love charisma. If somebody can be personable and have a conversation with me, that really tells me that they could sell their product to somebody else.
Great point,
And even if they're an introvert, if they just have the capability to converse and just have a common conversation like this, that's something that is really important to me. Other people look for experience, other people don't. The range of skill sets that people look for are very far and very vast. And so really, if you're just yourself, ask a lot of questions, be very genuine, people will read into that. Any sort of facade that you play on,
So true.
it's really easy to see through. And so it's just, if I were to give any advice, be yourself, be passionate, tell us why you think this is a solution, and we'll probably back you for that.
I love it. Okay, so you mentioned there rooting for the underdog. Tell me, I mean, do you have an underdog story? Do you have anything that kind of, even big failures, big things that have kind of rocked your boat a little bit that kind of make you want to see those little guys, the underdogs, kind of win?
Well, to be frankly honest, I've been given a very good deck of cards. I was dealt a very good deck of cards. My father, he was so successful, and it's a situation that I'm very thankful for. But with that, it comes with a lot of perceived, I guess, perceived connotations in a matter where it's people think that the world is given to you.
Right.
And frankly, it's not. But that was actually, if I were to say anything was an underdog story, which I don't really think it was, but if I were to say anything, it was those perceived impressions of me that the world was going to be given to me that actually motivated me to move away and do everything myself. It was really, really important for me to get away from my father's name as much as possible, not because I have any issues with my father. He's my idol. I love him. But because I just needed to be able to feel like I was the one creating my own success. Right. And
Great point.
Yeah, I don't know if there's really any underdog story, but that would be the defining note for me. I've always tried to be an individual and do it on my own.
Well, yeah, I can imagine. I mean, venture capital is an old industry.
Definitely.
Right? And you're a young guy, especially starting at what, 12? Right? So how did you ride that? I mean, this well, even running the university fund, a couple $1 million there that you were kind of responsible for growing and managing and all that. How did that play when you're being looked at as such a young person?
Well, to be frank, this is almost like an advertisement, but the university fund, I know U of C does it. University of British Columbia, I think, is starting it, but I went to the University of Saskatchewan, and if anybody has an opportunity to go into the Dombrowski portfolio class, do it. It's the best experience that you'll have, and it's really relatable, and it'll give you some really good, I guess, experience working with real capital, which is very different than play money. But for that, all you need to do is apply and put in the extra effort. But I guess outside of that, investing in the real world, it's funny, the majority of kids today have kind of really gotten into this crypto space and dabbled in investing in the markets. And I would just encourage anybody who has an opportunity to try and get into the markets, even with $100. It's a valuable experience. It's a really good life skill. And it's something that I would encourage anybody to learn the process of. It's so vital to life.
Great. Yeah, I agree. I mean, getting in and trying it out. I mean, especially even the entrepreneurs. I often say that, you know, to your point of passion, following your passions a little bit, everybody has a bit of a unique view of the world and a unique view of the problems in the world, and that they should, you know, at least try to figure out if they can solve it.
Definitely.
And then come to you and kind of work on that.
Definitely.
So I love the idea of one of my mentors, just a great guy that I appreciate and admire. Lots of companies, lots of investments, lots of work done, and great work done. He explains life a little bit like a tennis match, right? In the sense that you should always have somebody that when they serve to you, you can't even hit it.
True.
Right? And then you should have somebody that you can play with, and you just go back and forth, and you're a good peer-to-peer, you know, competitive spirit. I mean, you should always have somebody that when you hit it, they can't. When you serve it, they can't hit it. So kind of a hand up, a hand across, and a hand down in mentoring and kind of helping others. Tell me a little bit about what that might look like for you.
It's an interesting analogy or metaphor, rather. But I actually really believe in the messaging. So first and foremost, I like to think of myself as a creative person. But I was never the person that had the aha idea when it came to entrepreneurship. I never had the big thing, the next big thing. And so my thought process entering this industry is, okay, if you surround yourself with people that are more creative than yourself, you yourself become more creative.
Sure.
And so that's a big selling feature into being in this industry, is you're always surrounded by somebody who can tell you, hey, this is going to change the world and this is why. Whether or not they're successful or not is irrelevant, because their message has already been delivered, and it's just really a cool environment to be in. And so with a hand up, being 27, entering, as you described, an old industry, there's a lot of hands above me. And fortunately, I'm going to refer to my partner and I, Mark, we're very fortunate that we got into a situation where two of those tennis players that were hitting 100-mile-per-hour serves were capable of reaching down and really fostering us, taking us in and teaching us. And if it weren't for them, quite honestly, I don't know how successful we would be today. Hand in hand, there's so many people in this ecosystem, a lot more than people know, even though it's a very kind of little publicity industry specifically. And so globally, there's a lot of players that we talk to on a day-to-day basis. When I started this, I had very, very little networking. Now I'm all around the world globally. I have friends in Australia, friends in South America, South Africa, lots of friends in Europe, and traveling, it seems like every other week, going to amazing places to learn from other individuals in the same position as yourself.
Yep.
And a hand below, of course, as you age in any industry, you feel like you gain a measure of expertise and a measure of, I guess, knowledge and understanding of the industry. And of course, we actually just started our first hiring process. So we added in 2 to 3 university interns to our company, and that's kind of the beginning of the hand underneath for, I guess, the investment side of things. Really educating these kids coming out of university to what it's like being in an old industry as a young individual. And a subset of this as well, we're always a hand down to the entrepreneurs.
Sure.
We're always educating them on the process of raising finances, what to expect, what people look for. For me, I'm a huge advocate of hosting these entrepreneurship webinars and to really educate these people, and taking the time out of my day to have a conversation. Because at the end of the day, a conversation leads to more. At least it did for me. So that would be kind of what we would do, Red Thread as well as myself, right now in today's day.
So I love the idea of community. I mean, I think entrepreneurship is often feels like a bit of a lonely place. And it can be. I mean, you're, as the head of a company, you're kind of the person in charge, and nobody else in the company has that role. So it feels lonely a lot of the time. But I think you made a really good point. I think it's a little bit under the covers, but there's a tremendous, network, a tremendous community of entrepreneurs and investors and things going on in Alberta. How would you encourage people, what could you tell those entrepreneurs to, in and around that, how to get involved, how to get started, how to make sure that they're, sharing their stories, their war stories and everything in between?
So it depends on which avenue you're taking. If you're taking the investment avenue, I'll tell you right now, this is not a job you will find on LinkedIn.
Right.
To be frank, you will not find it. Yeah. Or even Indeed. Like, what you have to do, quite honestly, is network. I think one of the questions that you had me, quote unquote, prepare for was, what would you tell yourself when you're, what would you tell your younger self to do today? And the biggest thing is networking. It seems like such a cliche when you're in school. You're like, oh, networking. Like, yeah, I know I should meet people. But actually, like, networking. Like, it is quite literally everything in the world, both in the investment industry as well as elsewhere. And so for me, if you can just even like I said, email people in the relevant field that you're in and just have a conversation. That's so important. People don't understand how important that really is to just be known. It is a world where if you know people, it's helpful. And so I would really highly recommend everybody to network. From the startup perspective, how do I network when there's no necessary LinkedIn or Indeed for entrepreneurship? It depends on geographic location. One of our quote-unquote competitors, very good friends of us, they're Startup TNT. And I'm sure you're familiar with them, Tim and Zach.
Tim and Zach, yeah.
And so they created a great sense of community for the early onset and entrepreneurship experience here in Western Canada. And they're actually situated in Regina, Calgary, Edmonton, and they're continuously growing out westward. And so all you have to do, they have something called TNT, Thursday Night Tradition. And if you Google Startup TNT, I'm sure you'll be able to go on their website and try and attend one of their events. They like to go and have a beer with everybody and have a conversation. And at the end of the day, that conversation could be the difference.
Absolutely. No, I agree wholeheartedly. Well, that's good. So on that and building community and things like that, how do people reach out to you? How do they find you? When would you like to hear from people?
Well, so bandwidth is always a difficult thing, especially in a growing industry, but I would encourage anybody to reach out at any time. I'm a very transparent individual. It's something that I like to kind of pride myself on. And so even if my bandwidth is at an all-time low, I'll just be straight up with them and tell them, hey, I don't have time today, but let's make time next week or the week following or whatever it may be. And they can reach me at my email address. I'm sure you could provide that to them, or even my LinkedIn. If they want to connect to me on LinkedIn, happy to do that as well. Always open to a conversation, whether you're an entrepreneur or aspiring to be an investor in this field of work. I'm happy to give you my transparent, honest thoughts.
Yeah, sounds awesome. I'll make sure we include that in the show notes. That's great. Well, I appreciate your time today. It's really nice to get a chance to sit down. I know we've been planning this for a while, so
yeah, no, it's been a while.
I appreciate being flexible, and I know you've been busy all over, Western Canada and checking things out, making things happen. It's really great to meet you. I love the idea of kind of starting so young and being a new, fresh eyes in the industry. And I think that's really important. To me, a lot of what these interviews are about is the diversity. Just having different views of things, different ways of people looking at what's going on in the industry, and just bringing fresh, new things happening. So I love the work you guys are doing, and I look forward to working with you more.
No, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's always a good opportunity, not only for our brand, quote unquote, but to also give back to the community. It's actually really important. Something specifically in my line of work that's more important than anything else is community, because the more capital, the more entrepreneurship that starts here today, the more value I personally get out of it. So I'm selfishly telling you, if you're an entrepreneur, please start a company, because ultimately if you have that great idea, it could work its way around to me, and I could be benefiting from it as well.
Absolutely.
So feel free to help me out.
Yeah, it's kind of a ironic little side, what do you call it, selfishness, but it works, because when you benefit from it, I mean, really, ultimately, that's why we do things to a degree, but it's really helpful when it impacts the rest of the world too.
Yeah, no, and it's a very feel-good industry. Even if there's a lot of companies that don't quite make it, but you feel really great amongst the winners that are able to succeed. And there's a lot of great stories here in Western Canada. A lot of people are like, oh, it couldn't happen. I live in this area. Don't be bogged down by geography. There's a lot of opportunity 100%. Here, and it's a pretty incredible place. It's a pretty incredible environment.
Yep. So plug into the network, plug into the community, and keep growing, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Marco.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks. Bye.